he's the one that encourages Arthur to commit mass infanticide. He is the one who arranges for Uther to penetrate into the castle of Cornwall and into Tinachel and seduce Igraine. All of these are for the greater good of England, but he really doesn't care who he uses and who is cast aside and who dies in order for these things to come about.
Now, historically speaking, that character really is that more of a title, as portrayed in Avalon, in this Babylon?
Historically, in the most of the tales, Merlin is a name. His name is Merlin. He's a wizard. He's a Christian wizard, but he just happens to know magic, which is really a sort of a difficult thing for Christians, I think, to come to terms with, because the only power is supposed to be the power of God, and yet here's this wizard who can work magic, which is supposed to be the work of the devil, and yet he's working for the good of Britain and for Christians. And I think that a lot of that is rationalized by the idea that anyone can be redeemed.
Also, you talked about the Normans using this now to really push through it. The Normans are basically they're the ones in Norse gods and all that.
Yes.
So, I mean, is this maybe a further continuation of them trying to adapt their own? Their stories are just so epic and ridiculous. I can't even remember half the names. But is this just a continuation of that?
Well, you have to realize that the Normans, while they have their roots in Norway, by the time they were invading England, were also Christianized. So they were, although throughout all of the converted lands, I mean, any kind of converted people is going to adapt elements of their own history or their own myths and legends into Christianity. You'll see that a lot in Mexico and South America. There's a lot of idolatry where you have statues of saints and statues of Mary, but that is really harping back, predating the invasion of conquistadors, when you had the statues of the Mayan and Aztec and Incan gods. Anyone else? Yes?
Go ahead, Karen.
Go ahead.
I just had a question on how you put this story into computer game things. Can you explain that one?
How would you adapt the story to computer games? Well, a computer game requires, several things, but mostly it requires something compelling, a compelling plot. And certainly, the Stories of Arthur has a compelling plot. I think you would have to really jump in and decide what sort of game you wanted to make first. If you wanted to do something that was massively multiplayer, you'd do it like you'd just use a setting, and you could adapt some of the main characters as NPCs in a game like that, and then build quests. The Stories of Arthur is really about questing, and I think that anything you did with a game about Arthur would have to focus on questing as a primary thing, and then you just have to work on making those quests compelling and tying them together in some bigger arc, and then come up with a really compelling and interesting metagame to go with it.
So Morgan Le Fay is not mentioned much in this version.
In Mallory's version, Morgan Le Fay pops up actually probably more often than Morgause does as a foil. She's the Queen of the Fairies, and spends an awful lot of time trying to undermine the Knights of the Round Table. But ultimately, it sort of becomes apparent, at least to my interpretation. Everybody's welcome to their own interpretations. But to me, the idea is, at least what Mallory was trying to drive at, is that Morgan always saw Arthur as her baby brother, and really was more trying to test the resolve of his knights to make sure that they were going to be loyal and virtuous knights. Because in the very end, she's the one that brings the barge to carry him to safety. And it's a contrast to the way she behaves throughout the rest of the stories. So it seems to imply that she really did have his best interest in mind when she did all these things.
So she's kind of seen as just this kind of bad, flavorful character.
Right. Yeah. In Melanie's tales, the villains are pretty black and white. You've got really bad guys and really good guys, and then the good guys start to kind of falter. But I think that in this case, you see the only real redemption of the villains throughout the story is the redemption of Morgan and their reconciliation at Arthur's death.
Did you already mention what happens to Morgan?
To Morgause? Morgause has an affair with the daughter, or the son of King Pellinore, Lamorak. And one of the brothers, and I'm trying to remember which one, I think it is Gareth, finds them in bed and kills her.
Them both?
No, kills her. Lamorak escapes.
Okay.
But then all the brothers ambush Lamorak and kill him later. Yeah. But it all goes further back because predating that there's a feud between King Lot and King Pellinore. And so the idea that King Lot's widow is having an affair with King Pellinore's son infuriated Gareth and the other brothers because of this previous existing feud. So it wasn't just a matter of, oh, she's having an affair. It's, oh, she's having an affair with her father's deadly enemies.
So when we're going back to historically speaking, we have Lothian Keys up in North England.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these historical places have. When Arthur was around, was there any chance of having tribes that were closely following these areas, or were they? Especially with a Roman influence, or were they mostly?
Well, Rome by this time is far gone from England, and you've got a Saxon invasion. So the likelihood is that all of these tribes were starting to unite against the invading Saxons. And all of these tribal leaders could very well have been in those areas and could have been evolved into the characters that we read about now. King Lot, King Van, King Pellinore. When you look at it, there's a lot of kings. King Mark. All of these kings, there's a lot of little kingdoms around Britain. And I think that if you want to tie this back to the possibility of a historical Arthur, they were probably just tribal leaders that all agreed to let Arthur be the leader of the war against the Saxons. Which that wouldn't have been uncommon. You bring a bunch of tribes together, somebody's got to be elected war leader, the general of the armies, and according to Nennius, Arthur was elected 12 times, and it specifically says he was elected 12 times to lead the war against the Saxons.
In the myths, they talk about the Saxons already having treaty rights, already being established in parts of Britain. And you were talking earlier about how the Saxons came in, and the Normans came in, and was Britain just constantly being taken over?
I don't know about constantly. You had a couple of waves of invasion. And Britain's notoriously hard to invade. So I wouldn't say that it was constant invasion. It's not like the repetitive sacking of Rome, because Rome was actually, once the Roman Empire was sort of broken, Rome was easy pickings. It was very rich and easy to sack. Britain, there's not a lot to go into Britain for, but there's enough that it can be appealing if there's an inroad. So I can't say that Britain has been massively invaded over and over, but there was a sequence of invasions that did happen throughout this period between the 5th and 12th century. If you flip it around, then you've got the stories of Robin Hood, who was a Saxon, fighting against Norman tyranny.
So is magic seen as just this devil-like force?
Magic is just seen as matter of fact in Mallory's works. Magic just is. Morgan
And
Le
that's in
Fay,
addition to Christianity just being,
it just coexists with Christianity. Mallory doesn't really seem to pass any judgment on the existence or even use of magic. Merlin's a good wizard, and Morgan Le Fay is a bad wizard, but eventually Morgan Le Fay comes around, and there's a lot of enchantments. You've got invisible knights. You've got Gawain, who's one of the paragons of Arthur's court, is enchanted so that he's extraordinarily strong between 9 and noon. The scabbard that Excalibur is sheathed in prevents Arthur from taking wounds. Excalibur itself is a magic sword. And I think that Mallory sort of implies that the magic is a gestalt of holy power combined with people that know how to harness it.
is there mention of Lady of the Lake?
Yes, the Lady of the Lake is who gives Excalibur to Arthur. And Excalibur has some really interesting roots in origin. How many of you know really the story of the Sword and the Stone? Okay, so upon Uther's death, this stone appears with a sword embedded in it and an inscription: "Whosoever draws forth this sword shall be the rightful ruler of England." And night after night after night after night attempts to draw this sword out of the stone, they can't do it. In fact, they get to the point where they're holding tournaments for the right to attempt to draw the sword from the stone, because whoever can pull the sword out will become king. So Sir Ector, who fostered Arthur, along with his own son Sir Kay, brings Arthur and Kay to the tournament with the idea that Kay's going to fight in the tournament. At this point, Arthur is Kay's squire. Well, Arthur doesn't know too much about the story of the Sword and the Stone. He just knows that they're going to a tournament. So Kay realizes as he's reaching the tournament, he doesn't have his sword, so he sends Arthur back to fetch the sword. Well, Arthur runs back to fetch the sword. Well, that's a long way back to the tent. And here's his sword in this rock over here. So he just takes it. Brings it back to Kay. And there's all kinds of hullabaloo. Everybody's like, wait, that's the sword from the stone. How did you get it? Well, I just pulled it out. And first Kay tries to claim he did it. So they take it back and they put it back in the stone. And then Kay can't pull it back out. And a bunch of other knights try and pull it back out, and then Arthur goes up and pulls it back out. Now, in some interpretations, in a lot of interpretations, that sword is Excalibur. In Mallory's work, that is a sword. The sword, and it is a special sword, but the sword Excalibur is given to him as a gift. Merlin takes him to the Lady of the Lake, who presents him with the sword and the scabbard in order to, as a specially enchanted weapon that will give him even more power. So it goes either way. You can, but a lot of tales that follow try to simplify things by making them the same sword. Ultimately, Morgause manages to steal the scabbard from Arthur and throws it into the lake, so that he is now vulnerable to wounds. And when he is finally killed, his body is taken to the lake, and Sir Bedivere casts the sword back into the lake, and the Lady of the Lake's arm appears out of the lake to catch the sword and turn it underneath the water.
So she is seen as a water nymph or some sort of really out of this world character.
Yes.
And not so much as a political head of any.
Right. The Lady of the Lake is, I mean, she's seen as a ruler, and in some interpretations, the ruler of Babylon, but also as a very highly magical being that exists kind of between our realm and the realm of fairy.
So is she the closest influence to like the goddess in those series of?
I think, yeah, if you're looking for a goddess figure, the Lady of the Lake is probably the closest thing in Mallory's work to a goddess figure. She wields tremendous power and provides Arthur with the tools he needs to rule successfully.
As someone who's done a lot of work on this story, Lady of the Lake and Morgan's character throughout the ages, how did they develop into something that really is in